Okay, so previous part was kind of the intro to, okay, we're stuck in the laureate and bodily things aren't working like they should. I should mention one thing that I forgot to mention was that when I was stuck and had all the pain and things like that uh, in my groin before that, so I had been taking, I mentioned that I was taking licorice tablets, but I'd also started taking potassium tablets because I thought, okay, I don't have enough potassium to make myself go. And then I started, and maybe I'm hypernatremic, I don't know, and then my chest was beating so hard. I took my grandmother's, so I took her Lasix first, okay, because I'm like, okay, maybe the Lasix will help me pee. Okay, well, that didn't do anything either. So then I took, well, my chest was beating so hard, and I don't know why. Licorice makes your heart beat harder. Lasix is also not a great thing to throw in the mix here. So I took her nitroglycerin. So my system was definitely in some odd circumstances there before I bared down and had that reaction. Okay, so now then, here I am, rapidly losing fluid volume, despite trying to replace it. And now then I've gotten to where after I eat, I no longer feel intoxicated. I feel nauseated. I still get some of the hot, cold, and waxy stuff going on, but there's no longer this feeling of intoxication. It's a feeling of nausea and things. Uh, so I start trying to get out of there. I'm like, okay, something's wrong, somebody needs to see me, and nobody's listening to me. Okay, so I think, well, all right, I happen to notice behind the counter, this is totally bizarre. They have some medical, like, diagnostic books, some big thick books. I mean, you know, I don't know, a good 6 inches thick. Some of them, all of them, in fact, 6 inches. They had two or three of them. I don't remember. And I just said, well, hey, I'm bored. Can I read those? And they let me. And I was like, well, that was probably stupid, but they let me. So I start trying to figure out what's going on with my body by looking in this thing. I'm like, okay, so the first thing I realized is that I definitely have polyuria, and so I started looking for that. And then one of the things that I have been thinking I have had throughout all of this is some type of a intra-abdominal candidiasis. And because everything I read online, now this was 1995, so this wasn't Google. There was no Google in 1995. So to find anything online, you had to really go search. But from what I could tell, the symptoms that I were having with my intestines and things like that, the most common thing that people would point to, that where they would say, hey, this is something that doctors don't consider most of the time, was something to do with candidiasis. So I, first I'm looking up polyuria, and I look, and it's great. This book they have is fantastic. It has all these different medical conditions in it, and in the back it has a word by word index. You can literally look up one thing, one body part, one whatever, and any page on which that thing was mentioned is in the back of that book with all the pages laid out beside it. And if it's something common, it would be a whole bunch of things. Okay. Polyuria, not super common in the book, but there was enough pages that it took me a while to read everything. But in doing that, I found this really rare condition, which at first I was like, okay, well, I don't know. It seemed pretty complex, and I was like, yeah, I don't know. So this thing is called terminal onset diabetes insipidus with candidiasis major. Now, on the surface of it, terminal onset. Okay, so this means you're going to die, from this condition. Diabetes insipidus. So diabetes insipidus is just polyuria caused by various things, but it just means you have to go to the bathroom a lot. But it's associated with dilute urine And it could be caused by a whole bunch of different things, but terminal onset really isn't something that would be normally associated with that. This is definitely what I have learned over time. So that in and of itself is a pretty interesting thing because first of all, it scares me. And second of all, it sounds like what I have. But then it has this with candidiasis, and it used the word major. And I remember that was really weird to me because it used a French spelling of major. So M-A-J-E-U-R-E, and it had that in parentheses. And it also had like or minor. I don't know why. It's major or minor. I don't know why. But I thought it was interesting, so I started reading it. Okay, this was way above my grade level, is all I'm going to tell you. So first of all, this was like a rare case, and so they chose some of the things in there to go into a really in-depth analysis. Most of them they just had kind of a, I don't know, 3/4 page or something where they talk about the condition, or maybe a page and a half or something like that. No, this condition they had many pages on with pictures too, and it was quite fascinating. Is all I can tell you. So I'm reading this, and the more I read it, okay, the more I'm like, okay, yeah, this sounds like what I have. Except for the people that with this condition were from the early 20th century, and they had some type of tuberculosis infection or something that caused them to develop some other condition, and to where they got candidiasis. I'm not exactly sure what tuberculosis has to do with candidiasis. No idea. But so I think, I don't know. One thing led to another, I think, basically. So, but it talks, there's so much I could go into, okay? But these people basically go through the same thing. And it talked about, for example, like the intra-abdominal candidiasis phase at the very beginning was actually critical to like the whole process of it, because during that stage, it literally like destroys all the nerves in the lining of your abdominal cavity, and causes to where in later phases you would have issues that they would be able to identify, except for those were already destroyed. Those nerves are destroyed. But and it's very difficult for me to kind of verbally explain this because it's just so in depth and there's so much going on. But essentially, these people had the same type condition that I did. And it talked about how they would rapidly lose volume and it would lead to a stroke, a fatal stroke, if something wasn't done about the condition. That you could keep trying to give them more volume, but basically what was happening was that because they had been through this shift, their system, and this is the same shift that took place when I had the bulging veins. So during that shift, the heart nodes, okay, one takes over for the other. Because what's happened is due to this candidiasis and the shutting off of being able to urinate and the need to generate ATP, so the candidiasis has been kind of eating a whole bunch of the insides of you and creating this overload of potassium. Okay, so you get all this potassium in your system, and it causes your heart to beat harder and harder and harder. And when you bear down like I did there, somehow it disrupts the electrical activity at the AV node and the SA node. And I think the SA node takes over for the AV node, or the other way around. I'd have to look back at my writings to figure out which one, because I think I finally figured out which one, although I couldn't remember specifically. So it was me trying to figure out based upon things that I could read today. But anyway, but the consequence of that was that it would cause the atrium to beat harder as it expanded, and so it would cause this suction effect. And so you get that suction effect, okay, during this transition, and that suction effect causes the narrowing of the inferior vena cava. Okay, so here your inferior vena cava is the blood returning to your heart from your lower body. And so when you restrict it, okay, you cause this pressure differential between one end and the other. Okay, and so you have a big pressure drop over there. So what that means is on the other side of that restriction, the pressure is much higher than it would normally be. Okay, and on this side, it's actually probably lower than it would normally be because you have the suction. That's the whole concept, right? All right, so you've got this suction effect going on. Okay, and if you think about it, if that's all true, it definitely changes kind of the flow or your overall circulatory properties is the way I would put it. Okay. Anyway, so these people had this issue, and when that happens, so part of the things that change then, okay, due to those pressures, okay, those pressures are associated with, okay, and this gets kind of complicated too, but because of how your digestive system works and everything like that, the charge differential down at your nephrons, which is where your kidneys are, okay, so one of them has one charge and one of them has a different charge, and that charge differential is what helps you basically maintain your blood volumes and know when to pee and to know, you know, how much to pee and to know, you know, what your electrolyte balance is and everything else. Okay, so let's say positive, negative normally, right? Okay, well, due to this pressure change, okay, what happens is you've got negative, positive. Okay, so now, and this is why I was starting to be able to urinate again, was because it switched that polarity, and suddenly, okay, my system, which was hanging on to things due to SIADH, with this shift, suddenly everything would work again, just not quite like it should. So now you're retaining potassium and shedding sodium. So you're creating this even worse condition. And so that's how, you know, I was basically losing all this volume. But this article, okay, they had a way to fix that. Now, there were two ways that they proposed. One was for more modern medicine, and they said that this would work. And the other one was what they did in this experiment back in the early 20th century. Okay. Now then, this experiment, I'm going to go into some detail here. Okay, this experiment was basically what this article was about, because it followed the path of these people after they had this change done to them. Okay, and it talked about everything that would do to their life. It was like it would save them, but essentially, okay, and so let's first deal with, okay, what the problem is. So the problem is we have too much potassium. We have this pressure differential that shouldn't be occurring because we have this AVSA swap thing going on in our heart. Okay, so let's think about that logically. Okay, so how could we solve that logically? Well, we know we've got kidney damage from the whole initial swapping out of everything. Okay, so there is definitely that, and it made a really good allusion in the book, in the article too, kind of like saying, hey, you've got a hole, and so basically when I had that blood discharge, okay, that's like popping a hole kind of through kind of in the kidney itself, okay, not like through the outside, but in the place where it would allow you to essentially pee, and I'd have to look to see what we're talking about there, but you've got that damage, okay, so that's irreversible damage. But the rest of it had a solution to fix. So because of the suction thing, it basically changes kind of your circulation. And I know this is definitely meandering, but your system has already become acclimated to this change. Okay, remember how I had diaphoresis, and you know it's been a couple weeks now, and so your system has become acclimated to this change. And so what they in your pituitary is like kind of key to this acclimatization. All right, so their solution for modern times was you give the person an ethanol IV. Okay, And so here, what you're going to do is increase the osmolality of their system. And you can get that up nice and high. And the osmolality is key because it's what is basically kind of pressing on the pituitary and making it work hard. So what you're doing is getting the pituitary ready for this suction effect that's actually sucking on it too, because everything the way circulation changes, it's causing it to get more pressure or sucked on. I'm not sure if it's getting pushed on harder or pulled on harder, but anyway, it's getting influenced more. All right, so ethanol IV, and then stop and start the heart, and then slowly pull off the ethanol IV, and I think at some point you'd have to have dialysis. Okay, but so that all makes sense. You stop and start the heart. Hopefully the ABSA node thing clears itself up, and then you wean them off of the ethanol IV, and at most they need some type of dialysis for the rest of their life, or a kidney transplant or something like that. And I remember asking my mom at the time, I'm like, would you donate your kidney to me if I needed it? So I definitely remember that part. But that wasn't the solution they had in the early 20th century. So in the early 20th century, what they did was and this was a large number of subjects. And the reason I know this is because A, they had a lot of pictures, but B, they had a lot of people that were kind of in the same final phase of this condition at the same time. And this is something that plays out over decades. So, I mean, if you just take some kind of standard distribution and say you had 50 people and you're shooting for 25 years from now, you can imagine you wouldn't have very many of them kind of hitting the same place at the same time. So they must have treated a lot of people that had this TB effect that caused a candidiasis infection. But I've been unable to find this article since then, and we'll cover that later. Okay, so we've got the alternate solution. The alternate solution was they would have this person withhold their urination, okay? And remember, in this condition, you've got polyuria, you really want to go, okay? But withhold urination, and that would acidify their system. And I remember that specifically, they said till it was sufficiently acidified, okay? And then they would give them a shot of adrenaline. And then that adrenaline would cause a blood pressure spike, okay? And the blood pressure spike would cause a pseudo stroke of the pituitary, okay? At which point the pituitary would take over complete control of hormones and electrolyte balance from the rest of the brain, which is normally where a lot of that is done, okay? And at that point, a lot of different things would happen, but basically their system would get back in line. Okay, so how does their system get back in line? Hold on, I just got. Okay, all right, so injection of adrenaline. Sorry, got interrupted, but and this causes this pseudo stroke, is the way they caught it. And the way they actually describe it is that it would cause like the pituitary to actually form like a little microgranuloma on its surface, okay, as part of this transition. And so what happens here is the pituitary starts controlling things like ACTH, ACTH and your growth hormones, your luteinizing hormones, catecholamines, what else? Endorphins, everything, okay? It has control to everything. And basically it cranks itself up and it takes all of this extra potassium along with the candidiasis, and somehow via changing the net charge of everything, I'm not exactly sure, by manipulating these hormones and everything, it forces these ions out of circulation and into the interstitial space, all right? And so they get pushed out into the interstitial space. and that allows the electrolytes within your circulatory system to return into what it sees as normal. Okay, because so what it's doing is monitoring your system. Okay, and it's looking at all these things. And to me, this is just fascinating because this says, hey, your pituitary actually has access to the information of what is normal and what is not normal. And it literally starts spinning dials, okay, until it can get the electrolytes and everything into this normal range. Now then, those dials that it's spinning, okay, those are obviously going to abnormal settings, but those dials aren't things that most people check most of the time. They check the electrolytes. Everything good with the electrolytes? Well, everything's good. So this begins to the introduction of why literally the article calls this condition insidious. Okay, because it basically by the very nature of how it is, it hides its existence by keeping everything normal such that you wouldn't want to check anything that you might normally check if things were abnormal. And so what do I do? Okay. So I read this article and I'm like, well, this really sounds like what I've got. Okay. And it's got these two solutions. I need to get into a hospital. Like they need to do that one with the hospital solution. I don't want to do, I don't have an injection of adrenaline. How am I going to do that? So, I need this other solution, which means I need hospital involvement. So I'm like doing everything I can to try to explain, okay, what's going on in my system. I literally start talking to my psychiatrist about, look, I've got this thing going on. It makes me intoxicated, after I eat. I've got this polyuria thing going on, and they're just like, nobody's listening. So I literally try to break my arm. I'm like beating my arm against something to try, so they would put me into a hospital, so that I could then try to explain to a real doctor what the hell is going on with everything else. And who knows, they might have actually found, the weird electrolyte issues that I had going on in that moment. But they basically just thought I was going crazy, and they threatened to like put me under, like a 72-hour hold and, things like that, which, I mean, I wasn't going crazy. I had very good motivations for what I was doing. So I thought it over and I was like, okay, I got one other shot. That's this adrenaline method. I don't have access to adrenaline, but I got an idea. I was like, I looked up adrenaline and I'm like, where does adrenaline come from? What causes your body to produce adrenaline? And I was like, one of the things that causes your body to produce adrenaline is caffeine. So I was like, well, I mean, I can kind of knock out two birds with one stone here. So what I did was I asked for two 2-liter bottles of Diet Coke. My thinking was I didn't want sugared Coke because the sugar could influence the candidiasis, and I didn't want any of that going on. But I figured, hey, I know the pH of Coke is like, I don't know, 3 or something like that. I mean, it's ridiculously acidic. And so I could drink a whole bunch of that, not go, and then I will try to cause this pseudo stroke behavior. So I did so. I said, look, I won't ask to go anywhere. I will stay here if you will bring me these 2 bottles of 2-liter Coke. My mom will attest to this. She will say, yeah, that's what he said. I had no idea why he was saying it, but he said it. And I asked for the 2-liter bottles of Coke, and I sat down. As soon as, when they got me the bottles of Coke, I had the evening period or whenever, and I knew that I had this big amount of time that I didn't have to do anything. I just started drinking, finished one whole bottle and started on the next. Figured, okay, that's enough. At this point, you can imagine how much I feel like I need to go to the bathroom, but I have not gone. And I will say that before I started this, I mean, my legs were feeling heavy and leaden is how dehydrated I was getting. I can't, like just my muscles wouldn't respond. And if you look up dehydration and severe and things like that, you'll find that. As well as electrolyte issues can cause the same exact thing. So I drank, and then what I did was I held my breath, and I don't know if you had to do this or not, but I went, and where you press really hard with your lungs to force air, and I could make my whole face turn red doing this. And it's just something I used to freak out my mom by making my whole face turn red, so I was really good at it. And so I did that. And after some time, I don't know how long it took. After some amount of time, I started to get a headache like I've never experienced before or since then, where I was basically immobilized. Like if I tried to move, it was most intense pain. If I thought about moving, this is where it gets really bizarre. If I thought about moving, like if I thought, okay, my pinky is over here, I'm gonna lift it. Okay, when I sent that I'm gonna lift it, like thought to my pinky, but I hadn't lifted it yet, I got pain. All right, like dead center of my head. Okay, hold on. Okay, so headache, and it was super intense. And I remember another thing about it was like every single sound was so amplified. I mean, it just sounded like everybody was yelling. Every sound was like a gunshot, and yet I couldn't move. It was like I was immobilized. It was really strange. I was aware of everything, but I couldn't move. And then pretty soon, I realized that I was, I guess, more aware. I don't know how to say it, and I was able to like move my arm, and then I was like, okay, so I can move now. And the other thing I noticed is that I was warm, and that's something I had kind of left out, is that I had been cold for just forever. I don't know how to otherwise to explain it. Just even when I eat, except for when I was having those hot flashes, I felt like they had the air conditioning on high, and it's like suddenly I was just like, ugh, I got too many clothes on, and I felt much more normal. And I immediately had a bowel movement too. It's like I got up from there, and hadn't had one in days, and immediately it's like my system started working right again. So I mean, you can say what you want, okay? If you believe the article exists and you believe that the technique exists, and here's the other thing, is that I didn't have to go to the bathroom. Like when I stood up, I was ready for a bowel movement, but I did not need to pee, even though I had this extreme need to go. Okay, and I had drank a 2-liter bottle plus, no need. So you could say what you want, but to me, I believe that I affected their experiment. That I was able to duplicate that with myself. Okay, so kind of what are the implications there? I'm going to kind of skip over like the remaining days in that place. What I will tell you is that it wasn't perfect, like, but I was much more myself. I will say I had tachycardia for quite some time. They had to give me like a beta blocker, not just for while I was there, but for quite some time afterwards. But I was much better. Okay, I was able to sleep, things like that. But what are the longer term implications is kind of to discuss now, and then I'll probably stop this video and I'll record another one about kind of what I have endured in my life in the different phases of this illness. So the article wasn't about this procedure. I mean, this was like within the first, I don't know, several paragraphs of this article. Okay, And then there were pages upon pages about the implications of this experiment and the condition it caused, which they call this the terminal onset diabetes insipidus with candidiasis. And the implications are huge. I mean, physiologically, it changes the person. Okay, so nobody else in the world has just their pituitary controlling their electrolyte balance and doing everything it can to maintain that electrolyte balance, and not just your electrolytes, but also your blood sugar level. It's literally in charge of everything at that point. And so the things as you go through in life due to this they're rather extreme. So if you think about it, so you still have the pressure differential that I talked about at your with the inferior vena cava slight constriction, okay, which is causing this nephron issue, okay, which is causing this potassium retention issue, okay. And I've got a test result on my website. It's actually where I had them do urine electrolytes, and you'll see they test for three things: sodium, potassium, and chloride, okay. And you'll see my sodium and my chloride were normal, and my potassium was low, okay. And that's, I mean, realistically, it's not anything that's overly illuminating in and of itself. But when you take into account the whole picture and my explanation of things, it makes perfect sense, like why that was the way it was. And at the time, I was trying to say, well, okay, look, I was trying to get the bicarbonate level in my urine tested. So I really didn't focus on it at the time because there's a bicarbonate issue here too that I'll get into later, but they don't test the bicarbonate when they do the sodium, when they do the electrolytes. And what I was trying to say was that, look, I have way too much bicarbonate in my urine at that time for it to have the acidic pH that it has. Okay, like this is, so you would see, okay, yeah, it's acidic, but then you would see this huge amount of bicarbonate and you go, okay, something's off. Okay, there's like alkalosis going on somewhere. Anyway, I never got that because they don't bother to test sodium bicarbonate, which is one of the issues that they pointed out in the article. Okay. So what are the implications for the person? Well, so you've got this potassium storage issue going on. All right. And where is this potassium going? Well, like I said, it's going into the interstitial spaces. And in this first iteration, it's going into the epidermal layer, is where it's getting forced, is into the epidermal layer. And so you get some really weird stuff going on, is the best way I can put it. And what do I mean by that? So here's a great example. Well, I mean, there's just like lots of examples I could give you of really weird stuff that went on. But one was, I had to kind of train myself how to go to the bathroom, because so realize what I said about, I drank the 2-liter thing and I didn't have to go and all that stuff. What I found was that when I went to the restroom, I could just keep going and I would get past the concerning point. It would be, you'd be like, okay, I should have stopped by now. I never ever tested like how long at that point, like how long can I go until I stop? Okay. I just know it was much longer than it should have been. And I would just stop. I'd be like, okay, well, that was probably enough for now, and move on. And it's funny, just recently I actually ran into something where in 2019 or something like that, they got the longest urination in the world was like 8.5 minutes. Well, I wasn't anywhere near that. But it also said that usually something like that is something that's physiologically off with the person. So I can definitely concur with that. But so what were the other types of weird things that were going on with me? Well, now here is the most bizarre to me when I explain it to people, and they I mean, it's, so what I noticed, and so I had a lot of weirdness going on. I had like I would get like little, well, I know it's the candidiasis. So candidiasis can take different forms, and one of the forms is kind of like this long tubular form, and I would get these little protrusions in my skin, and And if I pulled on it, I could literally like pull out sometimes like something that was long, but it would then snap off. And that is actually not to do with what I'm trying to say, so I probably should have skipped that. But at the same time as that was going on, I noticed that when I would take a shower, just standing in the shower, like my body would take on water weight, like my feet would swell. Okay. And you're thinking, not really. No, that's not really happening, Jim. You're not really taking on water like through your skin. Okay. Well, maybe you're right. Uh, but I was pretty sure I was right. And so I decided that I was going to go to the gym, where I had a gym membership. And I was like, you know what? I can kind of figure this out by myself by going to the gym and getting in the pool. So I go buy a bathing suit and some goggles, and I go to the gym and I get in my bathing suit and my goggles, and I go to the pool and I leap in. I don't walk. I don't know if there were steps or not, but I'm one of those people who's like, you're going to commit something, you're going to commit. So I jump in. Immediately, I cannot breathe. And I don't mean I'm underwater and I cannot breathe. I mean, my head is above the water and I cannot breathe. Like my whole, my whole body, my heart is racing and everything. I mean, imagine it's like a panic attack, except for it's not a panic attack. And I get out. Well, I don't get out. So I pull myself to the side and I lay like with my head on the concrete, just sitting there, heaving breaths. And then I slowly pull myself out of the pool. And this is not a brief thing. Okay. And then I go in and I pee huge amounts. Okay. Huge amounts. And that was it for the day. So the next day I come back, I jump in again. This is who I am. I don't give up. Okay. So I mean, I have no other. I mean, imagine where I'm at right now. Like nobody's believing anything I say. My body is some bizarre state that nobody will believe me. I've tried to explain the state when I got out, but I didn't have reference. I didn't have the original book, to try to explain it to my doctor. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. My kidneys are working backwards. And that's all I could remember. I was just like, no, my kidneys are working backwards. And he's like, no, your kidney function is fine. I've got your electrolytes right here. And I'm like, yeah, but they're working backwards. And so anyway, so I jump in and my body takes on all this water weight. I go pee. Okay, so I do this until eventually weeks later, I'm swimming like 40 laps. Okay. Now here's the thing is that in the meantime, I've gained like all this water weight that my body has taken on. And it's kind of interesting. Like my feet are bigger, like my shoes don't fit as well. I've gone from an 8.5 to a 9, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you have skinny feet like I've always had, and suddenly your shoes don't fit, you notice. And here's another thing. I went on a hike with some buddies from work, and we went to the White Mountain in Arizona. I mean, in Arkansas. And like within the first day, I'm hiking, and the bottom of my feet is just like destroying itself. I mean, because it's this thin, watery flesh, and it's literally just like, I mean, I have the hugest blisters after just a few hours on the bottom of my feet, and I end up having to hike for 2 days like that. So, but anyway, so that's another bizarre thing that went on during that time period with water and everything. And so that is kind of the storage phase here of so you're storing these electrolytes, and you can imagine then that it makes your body kind of more permeable to water, because you get all these salts building up, and then it's like, oh, water. And it swells up because, hey, it's got all that water that it's got access to. And so eventually, and the article spent a lot of time talking about all these different phases that you go through. So let's call this phase 1. So phase one is this potassium storage. So eventually your body runs out of places to put this potassium. Okay. It's been storing it. It's been, it's ramping up your hormones in order to store more. And, pretty soon, you can imagine what it feels like, because it's like using adrenaline and everything to try to get you to pump harder, to push this potassium across the boundaries, and keep it stored outside the circulatory system so that your electrolytes maintain balance. Okay. And so you're basically, it just feels like you're going crazy. Meanwhile, as it's pumping harder and harder, you're getting this chest pain. And I can feel this on the night this happens, this chest pain, and it's just building in my chest. Okay. And it's building, and there's, I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm sorry. I don't have a lot of faith in medicine at this point in my life. Because I've been through everything up to there, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, this is going to kill me tonight, probably, because this pain is increasingly, more intense. All right. So it gets to the part to where I'm like, okay, this is it. This is the big one. It's huge amount of chest pain. And I get up, and I've been trying to like not urinate, because I'm like, it seems like it gets worse or whatever when I urinate. So I get up and I urinate. And this time, instead of getting worse, I feel like all this pressure release, just all of a sudden, like the pressure in my chest goes completely away. But the other thing that happens is suddenly I feel fluid in my feet. And it feels like my socks are wet. I literally thought that I had stepped on a wet towel or something like that. That's how wet, how my feet felt. And I looked down, and my socks were dry, and I wasn't standing anything. But I was like, oh my God, all the pressure is gone and everything. And so here's what's happened at that point. Your heart has been damaged. All right. And it can no longer maintain the flow. So just like anybody who goes through kind of like heart failure, basically you have kind of a pooling of fluids, except for in my case, all right, I've gone through this period where, okay, so this is something I didn't really cover, but so your cells, okay, when it pushes all that potassium out and everything, okay, it also forces the candidiasis out. Okay. And the candidiasis gets forced into cells. And this is like the key thing. So normally candidiasis is not something that is inside a cell. And that's why this is so atypical for a candidiasis type presentation. Okay. So, but what happens is it forces it inside the cell in order to get away from, okay, all these salts, okay, and the charges. It forces it inside the cell. Now, once it's inside the cell, and it's in these epidermal layers, it's in it at first, okay, it runs a sodium potassium pump in reverse. Now, this is because I think it produces potassium, so it's sitting there. Candidiasis is running this sodium potassium pump in reverse. So what happens is these cells just shrink, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they turn apoptotic. Okay, that means they're dead. They're basically just little shrunken bits of kind of salt. They're wrapped in a cell. Okay, and so you've had that happen. Okay, and so when you take on, when this fluid overflows, where it would normally swell up the cells and everything, okay, we've skipped kind of a lot of years here. We've gone from the pool and the swelling to the flesh and everything. So in between that time, there's a period when all this apoptotic stuff happens. And so at this point, the fluid does not go into the skin. It does not build up in your ankles or anything like that. Okay, it literally is just kind of being held in by this tight skin that's been apoptified, I guess is the best way to put it. And so you look at my ankles, and they don't look swollen at all or anything. And so as a result, you don't have like an increased, what do you want to call it? An increased workload on your heart. with this fluid building up and it trying to get that fluid out of there and things like that. No, instead you just have this now second stage entering where, hey, now we're actually able to kind of rinse out that potassium that's been stored up, and it gets out of your system. It gets, I think at this point, it starts getting pushed into your fecal matter, because I remember there's like different ways that it gets rid of it. So I think at this point, it's like, okay, it gets pushed in your fecal matter for a while. And then you slowly begin building up bicarbonate, I think, in your system, because we damage your heart. You've got this respiratory alkalosis thing going on. Anyway, I'm not really sure. A lot of this part of the science, I'm not super sure on. I'm sure on kind of the generalities. But anyway, so now then you've got this kind of second phase going on. All right. And so accompanied with this is like changes in bowel habits and bowel type stuff. And each one of these transition actually changes the bowel type stuff. And so now that you've got that going on, okay. And then so there's other phases that happen. Okay, so eventually you get to a point where, and I don't remember exactly why this happens or whatever, but you've now got your osmolality gets so high, it's pushing on your pituitary, okay, with the way it's doing everything. And so your pituitary has to basically just kind of stop working so hard so that it's not causing these other things to take effect, okay? And that is another transition that you go through. And it's, I mean, there's two different transitions that I went through that are very dramatic that I can't exactly say for sure what happened in which one of them, but the first one was, it just felt like I mean, I just felt like I was manic, and I couldn't control, I couldn't sit still, I couldn't, it felt like I was going to explode. It was the best way I could put it. I just felt like, everything was just building up, and I didn't need to be moving at all. And it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And so I coated myself with, and here's where introducing more than one variable at the same time is very bad to a system. So I coated myself in hydrocortisone, like 2%, the strongest stuff you can get, literally from head to toe. Okay, because I'm like, okay, this is because it talked about how you'd have this an Addisonian crisis, that you would literally push through the Addisonian crisis with this condition. And so I was like, okay, this is that Addisonian crisis. The only way I can solve that is with, like a hydrocortisone injection or something like that. And so I just coated myself from head to toe in hydrocortisone. Now then you would say, well, that shouldn't do anything. I don't know. It definitely changed things, but at the same time, I finally was able to pull some strings on. I got admitted for like just observation at a hospital. And so now then we got another variable introduced, because now I'm suddenly in this hospital and I'm not feeling this feeling anymore. Okay. So I think at this point I've already kind of at least temporarily resolved the issue, or we've made it over the hump or whatever, But what I notice is that I don't need to urinate. Okay. And it's like, I can't. And I'm like, well, look, I'm trying to get them to believe me. And I'm like, this has to do with my pituitary. And they're like, well, what do you want us to do? So they ran a whole bunch of blood tests. And I said, and I want a head CT. So they did a head CT with an iodine contrast. Now, I don't know if it's iodine contrast here or not. But when I got done with that, it just felt like my whole body was turning to mush. I mean, all my muscles, and I was in good shape. I always have maintained good shape during this disease, because I know that, I have something that you need to stay in good shape for, basically. So, I felt like my legs were like getting soft. It felt like my bowels were going to release themselves. I had zero strength. I felt so weak. It's like all my muscles had no strength. And once again, I couldn't go to the restroom. And so I told them, oh, everything's fine. I'm ready to go home, and a day later they released me. Okay. I didn't bother telling them I couldn't pee or anything like that because I was like, I just want to go home and die. I'm obviously dying here. And so I went home, and it was, I don't know, at least 4 or 5 days, I would say minimum, before I peed again. Uh, and it's actually, when I finally peed, it was because the first time I drank a sugared Coke. Now I've always drank diet for the longest time, but this one time I'm just like, you know what, I'm dying, and I'm just gonna have the luxury of a sugared Coke. I drank the sugar Coke, and suddenly I had to go pee, and I was just like, well, looks like in this phase I need to drink sugars. So for a while there, I started drinking sugars type things, because in previous stages those would always cause stomach issues for me and everything else. But during this phase, obviously I needed to. So that is one weird transition. Another weird transition that happened was in 2018. I decided to give blood. And I should back up here and say that one of the things that the article talked about was with the buildup of potassium, that like in this initial phase, when all that potassium is building up before you get to these other phases, that you can give blood, okay, and get rid of excess potassium. And so, man, when I was, in the late 90s, I gave blood very regularly. I was a regular at the blood bank and everything. And whenever I started feeling off, I knew to go give blood, and it would always resolve it for me. But then I stopped because my doctor during the checkup, he said, well, you're slightly anemic, and you probably shouldn't donate blood. And I'm almost like, great, there goes that solution. So I stopped donating blood. And I probably should have just kept on and just, but anyway, so during 2018, when I've now been through at least one or two other transitions, so no longer in this previous type situation, I decided, for whatever stupid reason, to go donate blood. And I know why I decided it, because I was trying to prove to myself that I was healthy, that I didn't have this condition. And that's such a huge part of this condition that people underestimate, is especially without documentation out there, because they redacted this knowledge, there's not even a confirmation that this thing exists, okay? That makes it difficult to convince yourself to live a certain way or to do a certain thing. I mean, I always managed to stay in shape, okay? But, and I didn't drink very much, because it talked about in the article how it was hard on your liver, the condition was and everything, and these guys would drink a lot. And I was just like, well, I don't need to do that. But anyway, so, oh gosh, hold on a second. So I decided to give blood to prove to myself that, hey, you know what? If I have this thing, then something's going to go wrong when I give blood, possibly, because it talked about how, in later periods of the illness, like sudden blood loss could actually kill you. And I had made a decision in like 2000, after I had a transition in like 2012, and I had made a decision then. I'm like, well, I've got this disease. It's obviously going to kill me before I'm real old. I want to be in a better relationship before I die, so I'm going to get a divorce. And I went through that, and then I got all in shape and stuff, and I convinced myself, hey, maybe I don't have this thing, and I thought for a while maybe I had porphyria, because there's a lot of skin issues that come with this, a lot of burning sensations and things like that. And so I thought, this will prove once and for all, that I don't have it. I'll just go give blood. Okay, so I went and gave blood. That was like I want to say it was a Thursday, might have been a Friday. And I remember I felt like manic the next day, like, or that day. I don't remember, but I remember it was either that day or the next day. I had this manic kind of feeling. I remember I lost my keys and I was all upset and I had to hurry to get to a date that I had. And I remember just feeling like all anxious and everything. And then I went home, I went to bed, and the next morning when I woke up, the room was spinning. And it was like I was drunk, but I wasn't drunk. And it was just complete vertigo. And I was like, well, that is not good, and so I just dealt with it for a day. I mean, I was nauseated. I dealt with it, and we ended up going to the ER. I've got some of those records here, maybe, but no, they didn't find anything in the ER. They just said, hey, it's probably inner ear. So they gave me a prescription with some inner ear medicine or whatever and told me to do these exercises, And I will say that the vertigo type stuff kind of resolved itself, but I still had this kind of nausea and I started kind of going through some more stuff and I didn't feel good. And then one night, like I got not so nauseated that I almost vomited, and then all of a sudden, I'm laying on the floor. I mean, just like that. I can't breathe. My hands, my feet are numb. I have almost no strength. Okay, and I managed to throw my phone into my son's room and say, call 911. And they took me to the ER and my blood pressure was like, 95 over 50 or something. I don't remember. It's really low for me, like not being on any medications or anything. I've always had like, just borderline high blood pressure, 130 or so over, I don't know, 90 or 85. And, for me to suddenly like have this sudden transition, which is all you can call it, to where I suddenly had this low blood pressure condition. And they gave me 2 units of saline, and I still had, when they released me, I still had a blood pressure under 100. Definitely, something went on there. And I went through a whole bunch of stuff over the following, I don't know, month or two. And then I got through it, and I got into a healthy phase. But that's yet another one of these transitions that these people go through. And the article talked about how, the people would go through these transitions and they would, it's interesting because they talked about so it literally changes your ATP generation. And it was one of the key phrases in the article. It's like, right at the beginning, it said, this condition can be summed up in one phrase. It's all about ATP. And I didn't even know what ATP was, but basically ATP is like the building block of how your body generates energy, and or it is basically almost the energy that your body generates would be a good way to look at it, and it's exactly right. As you go through all these different phases and everything, what's going on is this huge battle between the candidiasis and your immune system. And I'm going to get very philosophical here and say that given the complexity of this interaction, where it goes, this has to occur and then this has to occur, and like the fact that you have to have had the inner abdominal candidiasis so that your nerves are deadened, so that you don't feel these other things that go on later, and the fact that it keeps your electrolytes normal, and the fact that it makes you indistinguishable from anybody else. You look the same except for these bad periods that you have. The fact that it waits decades, okay, essentially before it kind of will reemerge. Basically what will happen is you'll get to one of these kind of transition points, and and your body will have to start moving back the other direction, and as you move back the other direction, you'll cross some point, and at that point your pH will reach the value, or your electrolytes will reach the value where that candidiasis can reemerge and cause you more problems. But what I'm saying is because of just the sheer complexity of it, and the, like, Rube Goldberg likeness of it, it's evolutionary. And when I say that, I don't mean it's a forward evolution thing. What I say is, I think at some point in our past, we or some other mammal had this heart that operates by suction, because I think that's the whole key to the whole condition. Like, so you have that suction. None of this other stuff would occur without that one thing. Okay. And so you have a system with a heart that's beating one way, and so maybe it only had one node, okay, and it didn't have both nodes or whatever, but it's beating one way, and candidiasis is 400 million years old, and man is not, okay. And so candidiasis, and candidiasis can change its form, man cannot. If we were 400 million years down our evolutionary ladder, I would imagine we'd be able to do much more than we can do today, but we cannot change form. Candidiasis can. And it knows at these different times, and it talked about it in an article about how at this point, it's monitoring your oxygenation, for example, and it would say, and if your oxygenation gets too high, then it would do something actually that would damage your heart, such that it would decrease your oxygenation, and things like that. And I mean, that type of complexity just screams out, okay, that's an evolutionary step, where there was some point at which, candidiasis and a mammal, maybe the man, I don't know, that was a very common thing, and it learned, okay, and the way a fungus learns is basically by living through something and trying something, and that works, and so it gets to live longer. And so then it learns, okay, I'm going to do something else. And if that one doesn't work, it dies. And so if you think about it, the longer lived ones, they're the ones that persist. So what you have kind of is this, Darwinism of candidiasis, and learning how to manipulate the immune system and the pituitary and everything else, and I mean, to me, it's just fascinating. It's the only thing I can think of to explain the sheer complexity of it, like how that could be, and which just makes it that much more tragic that this science is not available. I have looked everywhere that I can think of. I actually currently have a request into the Library of Congress asking them to look, and I cannot find this information. And I definitely read it. I definitely saw pictures. I saw a lot of pictures, and they weren't. It's not available. I haven't been able to even find that phrase somewhere. I've looked on the Google Books online, the archive, the Internet Archive. It's just not out there. And I mean, it's not a 28-year psychosis. So I don't know what else to say. Anyway, so I think I've given you the introduction, and then I've given you the kind of hey, here's the weird type of stuff that goes on. There's a bigger write-up online. You can go, look into that if you want. I've got my test results, etc. From here, I think I'll probably just focus on, maybe some of my philosophical waxings, but also just, just say where I'm at right now. And so once again, this is the same date as the first one. It's August 23rd, 2023. And, it's gotten to the point now where it's impacting my arm, I should say. And it talked about this in the article, about how it had people who had like the shriveled up limbs. It had other people who had like tied off their limb and things like that. And they tied off their limb because the circulation keeps getting lower and lower until they want to preserve as much as they can, so their stomach still has circulation, so they can still get digest food. Because I guess I should talk about that in my next one. But the basically, you know, I'm just a heap of rotting flesh processing salts. Is kind of what it amounts to. Is a really crude, disgusting, you know, thing. And so you want to keep the things flowing through your system. And once those stop, then you know, everything's over. So these people would do anything to preserve what small amount of volume they had left, because all of this causes you to lose more and more blood volume over time as your interstitial spaces fill with salt. And the ATP for those areas are generated through alternative methods, which I also haven't covered. I guess I should talk about that more. So there's those two topics for next time: it's ATP generation and salts. And yeah, so these people would tie off their limbs or whatever. Eventually, it gets to the point where, so you've been through a lot of different. So your system during these phases, it goes acidic and then basic and then acidic and then basic. And that isn't that horrible, except for it doesn't feel real comfortable as you shift through, and it gets to the point where the candidiasis can come out for a little while and play, and you usually have a lot of skin issues and other issues at that time. But it's really hard on your heart to go through a shift from acidic to basic to acidic to basic. And anyway, and the other thing it does is it pulls all of your circulation into your epidermal layer and removes it from your muscle layer. And at some point, your muscles have so little circulation in them, but they have these electrical impulses going through them, okay? And I haven't really talked about how the muscles, so a muscle is one cell, gets invaded by the candidiasis, turns apoptotic, okay, at some point. I'm not going to say which transition, what that was, but now you have this apoptotic muscle cell, which still works great, by the way. And as it gets loaded with electrolytes, as it is loaded with electrolytes, it transmits electrical signals great, okay? It's just no longer alive. And as long as the pH stays at this, I think, basic state, I think it does fine like that. Okay, it's when it gets to when an acidic state hits it, that with sugars, that now it activates that candidiasis inside there, and then you got kind of bad issues going on because your muscles are basically getting attacked. They were already attacked a long time ago, and they're dead. Okay, but now they're actually getting eaten, if that makes sense, kind of from the inside out. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Is that in the first week of July? So hey, it's been 7 weeks like this already. I was repeatedly playing a video game that had me clicking a mouse over and over again. So if you think about electrical impulses, they're coming from your brain, your motor cortex, down here, and through your shoulder and down into your hand. All right. And so I first noticed a little like numbness kind of under my shoulder, and I kind of iced it. And then by, I don't know, that evening or the next day, my whole shoulder was locked up, like the muscle, very tight. And that was disturbing, but I mean, it hurt if I, raised it up like this or certain things, but doing anything like this, just fine. And then what I would notice is that whatever would make it hurt, if I did that, okay, the next time I did that, okay, well, it would hurt a lot, first of all, the first time. But then later when I did that, whatever it was, it wouldn't hurt as much, okay? And maybe the next day or whatever, I mean, if I was to, get it, let's say it was this arm instead, and do this, okay? And that, I would feel like a ripping pain, okay? And it would hurt a whole lot, and it would echo, kind of an echo of pain for a while. But then later, when I went to do that, it wouldn't hurt. Okay, and so that is the tearing of the muscles, and that's what's going on right now. And part of the problem is because it's unilateral right now. It's just on one side. then of course they think it's orthopedic or something like that. So I finally got an appointment after waiting for months with a rheumatologist, and that was a couple weeks ago. And the rheumatologist said, okay, well, maybe a little longer, 3 weeks ago, I don't know. So, well, first of all, my first appointment was supposed to be like the first week of July. It would have been perfect timing. I just had the muscular stuff, everything. And that appointment had only taken me like, I don't know, 4 months to get, something like that. And then I got a call the week before that the doctor was going to be out of the office, so they bumped it to the first week of August. And then I showed up that week, and the doctor was out of the office, and they hadn't bothered to call me. So they scheduled me for the next week. So I guess it's been about 2 weeks since I had that appointment. And they stem, yeah, right at 2.5 weeks, I guess. And she like didn't bother to listen to me try to explain, hey, I'm not here for this. Like, I was trying to get this appointment before this started. She just evaluated this. And she did run some basic blood tests to look for autoimmune stuff. It's just that this is not your normal autoimmune stuff, so it's not going to show up. But anyway, so she said, no, that's got to be orthopedic, and said, make an orthopedic appointment. So I've done that. I had an MRI this morning. I had an EMG Monday. I know the EMG was normal. I don't know what the MRI I come back. I talked to my EMG doctor, and I'm like, I think what's happening is that, I got these tears going on, and then, you got like some macrophage process that's kind of cleaning that up, and then it'll tear some more. And he's like, well, they might be able to see that with lipids, so maybe that'll show up. I kind of doubt it on the MRI. But that's basically where we are today is, hey, we're waiting for results. MRI, my follow-up appointments aren't for several weeks. So I don't know how many updates I'll actually make before then, unless I have another day like yesterday. Yesterday, for example, my arm hurt so much. And I think it was because of the EMG that I had Monday, honestly. But I don't know, because the EMG sends these huge electrical signals to your arm. And I can tell you my arm had not hurt as much as it did yesterday, and at all. And, I don't know. It could also be that I ate carbs. I know you think that's weird, but if this is candidiasis, all the people in the article, they ate just protein in this final phase. They only ate protein. They also didn't go to the bathroom. It's just like a whole nother thing. But so the reason they're not going to the bathroom is at least as little as they can is because they're trying to retain the sodium bicarbonate that's in their system, because once their system gets acidic, then that kind of takes them into the next phase. So the longer they can hold on to sodium bicarbonate, the better. So they don't drink and they only eat protein. And because of the way this whole system works, you think, oh, they'd be dehydrated. Don't ask me, it works, because once again, because the pituitary is literally in control of your electrolytes, you don't get dehydrated. Okay, you may lose. They shrunk. They lost volume. Okay, but it was in their interstitial space areas of volume. So anyway, they went months without drinking. I remember, I think the longest guy was like 105 days. They said to get going without drinking, and he just ate. So, and they just ate beef. And anyway, there's even more there. There's more than one way that you can end up that these people went. At the end, they could choose to eat and drink, and if they did, they went one way. They could choose to just eat, and they could choose to have alcohol, which supplanted their needs for calories and everything else and their osmolality, but it caused their whole body to basically kind of do what my muscles are doing over here. So anyway, I remember just thinking, why would they keep drinking if it was going to do that to them? I don't know. So that's it for now. I know it sounds crazy, and I know that it's impacting my brain right now, because I know that the way I sound is, I don't think it's quite manic, but it's I talk quickly, and I don't know. Anyway, it's interesting. In the article, it talked about how it made the people more intelligent, like because it increases blood flow and oxygenation, and energy to your brain. That these people had all these deep philosophical discussions, and most of them weren't like really well educated people. So I definitely think that there's some of that there too. That it just makes your mind quicker. At the same time, there are some pauses there that at times I just kind of bleep out, and it's because my mind is somewhere else. So I guess that's it for the second one. I'll have two of these. So I don't know when I'm going to aim them for. Probably 2024. I don't know if I got 1 week, 1 month. I know it's less than 2024 though. Talk to you later.